So yesterday we had focused on Mussolini as well as Hitler and just sort of, their rise to power and how they came to be who they are. Today we're going to focus a little bit on Stalin and then just kind of talk about how Hitler began to, expand throughout Europe. I was going to say expand Germany, but that is correct. How he expanded Germany and really throughout Europe. So Stalin and the Soviet Union. So in 1917, Russia was having a little bit of a problem. They had been involved in World War One, but there was a lot of government infighting going on even before World War One had officially began. But when World War One started in 1914, the infighting, especially in Russia, had just exploded. And by 1917, um, the Russians are basically going to enter into their very own version of a civil war. So they peace out of World War II. They signed this treaty, and they basically tell the rest of the European powers and the U.S., "Hey, we know that this war is going on. We no longer want anything to do with it. We've got our own problems. We've got our own civil war to fight. So peace out." And in 1917, the Bolsheviks that had been led by Vladimir Lenin, they're eventually going to establish a communistic government within Russia. Before that, Russia had been essentially a monarchy, but by 1917, the monarchy is going to be overthrown. Nicholas Tsar II and his family, they're all going to be murdered by the communists, and a communistic government is going to basically consume Russia. And by 1922, they're going to rename their territories the USSR, which becomes the Union of the Soviet Socialist Republics, or the Soviet Union. So oftentimes you'll hear me sort of say the Soviet Union, or I'll say Russia. Soviet Union is really from 1922, about the early 90s, and then Russia works for everything else. But they're essentially the same thing. It's the same country. It's just very different names. But the Soviet Union is essentially going to become the new official name for Russia. So Joseph Stalin was a very interesting guy. Joseph Stalin, that's actually not his real name. Um, Normally I would have like a kid look it up on their phone, but his name is very Russian. I cannot pronounce it, but if you go and look it up after this, or you even pause this lecture right now and look it up, you can hear his actual name. But he ended up changing his name to Joseph Stalin, which means Man of Steel. Why would he change it to Man of Steel? No, it's not because of Superman. Superman doesn't come about until 1939, but he changed his name to mean Man of Steel to, to represent strength and just how strong he really felt that he was. Some interesting things to know about Stalin. He was basically an only child. His father was an alcoholic. He used to beat him as well as his mom. He had suffered from smallpox as a kid and had scarring all over his face. That's why he had facial hair like on his face, was to protect from like the scarring. And oftentimes he would get bullied in school because kids are mean, and if you have a bunch of scars, like, kids make fun of you. So that happened to Stalin as well. Unlike Mussolini and Hitler, Stalin did not serve during World War I and was not in the military. But by 1917, he had been pretty much a higher up within the Communist Party in Russia. Vladimir Lenin had really been the leader of the party and someone that people had looked to. But by 1924, Lenin had had a ton of health struggles. He had suffered several strokes, and when he died, a power struggle is going to ensue within the party. The two guys that are going to kind of come out on top are going to be Joseph Stalin and Leon Trotsky. But by 1926, Stalin had consolidated power. He ended up getting rid of Leon Trotsky by exiling him from the Soviet Union, and then eventually he'll have Trotsky assassinated. If there is anything that you should know about Joseph Stalin, you should know that he was paranoid beyond belief. He thought anyone and everyone was out to get him and come after him for his power. You looked at him funny, he had you killed. You did something different that maybe you didn't do every other day, he had you killed. Like during the 1930s, there was a purge within the government in which like hundreds of thousands of people were just murdered and slaughtered because he basically thought everybody was out to get him. And when he dies in the 1950s, they opened up his brain and they examined it, and they found that like he was legitimately crazy and just went undiagnosed. But he was very unhinged, very paranoid, and if he thought that you were trying to come after him or take his seat on the throne, like there was no question about it that he was going to come after you and have you killed or thrown in prison or whatever it may be. The Soviet Union becomes very famous for the gulags, which were labor camps in which people would work like 14 to 16 hours a day. He didn't trust anyone, including his own son. His own son died in a concentration camp during World War II. He actually thought that his son willingly surrendered, and so he was like, "Yeah, I'm not going to save him," and like let him die in one of the concentration camps. Like that's just kind of like how paranoid he really was. Under his regime, you had about 8 to 10 million peasants who had resisted communist policies and were killed. or if they, didn't even necessarily resist communist policies, were thrown into labor camps. So maybe not killed right away, but they would essentially work until they died. And then, of course, in World War II, the Soviets are going to lose, about 20 million people. So under his regime, they estimate that probably 30 to 40 million people died when he was the dictator of the Soviet Union. Quite a bit of people. So going back to Hitler, because when you really look at sort of those three dictators, Hitler's the one that stands out, and part of the reason that he stands out is the expansion that he started to, institute in Europe, especially in the 1930s, after he had, come to power, consolidated it to just him, and decided that, hey, Germany's going to be great again, and essentially they're going to expand. And Hitler had really called for the unification of German-speaking people. He was like, these are our people. They belong with Germany. After World War I, Germany was forced to give up a lot of land and a lot of control that they had throughout Europe. Especially in the 1800s, Germany had this really great empire, and so Hitler was really harking to go back to that, which is why the colors of the flag was red, black, and white, because those were the colors of the old German Empire. And so he was really looking at seizing both Austria as well as Czechoslovakia, in the hopes that it would give Germany food supplies, defensible frontiers, soldiers, and then, of course, it's just going to expand territory and really give Hitler the opportunity to expand his powers. So Hitler's really going to start with Austria, and he had threatened to invade Austria if they didn't appoint Nazis to important government posts. The Austrian, well, not Austrian government, but in Austria, the Nazi Party had some power, and they had been calling on Austria to reunite with Germany. They were like, listen, we were a part of the German Empire before, we want to, reunite. And again, like everyone had been suffering after World War I, there was also kind of this idea that if these countries sort of unite together, that hopefully they'll be able to dig themselves out of this economic hole that all these people had really been in. And the guy who was in charge of the Austrian government, his last name starts with an S. I can't pronounce it. If you haven't noticed, I have a very hard time pronouncing Eastern European names. He decides to sort of give in to Hitler, but not really. And this is where he decides to tell Hitler, let's put it up for a vote. Let's let the Austrian people vote and decide whether or not, Austria is going to go ahead and unite back with Germany. And people say, yes, we'll do it. And if they say no, like, we're going to go ahead and back out. But Hitler was like, I'm not wasting my time with this. He kind of decides to go ahead and invade Austria anyway. And then, the guy who was in charge of Austria was like, yeah, all right, like, here you go, out of sort of fear for his own life. He was like, yeah, go ahead, take Austria, it's yours. And he gets put in prison and doesn't get released until after World War II officially ends in 1945. But Hitler's starting to expand. He's also starting to expand very quickly. So he has his eyes set on Austria, and very quickly he's able to take over there. After Austria, Hitler's going to set his eyes on the Sudetenland, and that was an area around Czechoslovakia with large German-speaking population. So I'll come back to this, but if you notice here, we have Germany in the pink, Austria in the purple, which at this point had already been taken. We have Czechoslovakia in kind of like this ivory color, and then around Czechoslovakia is this gold area known as the Sudetenland, and there were a lot of German-speaking people that were there. And again, Hitler and the Nazi Party are very focused on building this master Aryan race. So he was like, those are German-speaking people. Those are my people. We need to be reunited with them. It's not fair that we had to split up after World War I. They didn't want it. We didn't want it. So let's reunite and get things together. Well, Czechoslovakia very strongly resisted. They were like, we want nothing to do with Hitler or Germany. They had kind of saw what was happening. People's civil liberties were being suspended. Again, if you had any opposition to Hitler whatsoever, you were either killed or thrown into prison. They just kind of wanted nothing to do with them and sort of saw the danger that was really coming towards their country. So they, at the time, Czechoslovakia, they were allied with both France and the Soviet Union. So they kind of like call them up and they're like, hey, Hitler's threatening to invade. We don't know what to do. We really need your support. And so France and the Soviet Union are like, listen, if Germany does anything with you, Czechoslovakia, we got your back. We promise you we're going to make sure that Hitler doesn't harm you in any way, shape, or form. And they end up calling this meeting that becomes known as the Munich Conference. And they're going to meet in Munich, Germany. And that is in the state of Bavaria. It's like Germany's wealthiest state. I've been to Munich before. It's absolutely beautiful. They have this large public garden. It's like one of the largest public gardens in the world. You can go surfing in this park. You can like drink beer. You can eat. Like you can sunbathe naked. You can ride bikes. Like anything that you can think of that like you could do in public, you can do in this park. It's like absolutely massive and gorgeous. And Munich as a whole is a very beautiful, very rich and wealthy city. So on September 29th of 1938, the Munich conference is going to take place. And this is very important. I was starting to highlight this because this is huge. Representatives from Britain, France, Italy, and Germany meet to discuss the Sudetenland. Keep in mind, this is in 1838. Everyone is still going through a Great Depression, kind of. They're still recovering. They're also still recovering from World War I. And Britain and France are like, listen, we don't want to go to war again. Like, that's like the last thing that we want to do. We don't want to go to war. We're still recovering economically. Our soldiers are still recovering. The nation is still recovering. When war takes place in your country, it's years upon years upon years of damage. Even when I went to Germany about 2 years ago or a year and a half ago, like as we were driving through East Berlin, like you would see bullet holes in the building, and they're like, yeah, those are from World War II. So like those damages still exist. So Britain and France decide we're going to go ahead and make a deal with Hitler, and this becomes known as appeasement. They decide we're going to appease Hitler. Here's what they tell him. We're going to give you that Sudetenland area. So this area, all in the gold, we're going to give it to you in exchange for peace. They tell Hitler, you cannot invade the rest of Czechoslovakia. If you're going to take the Sudetenland, you take the Sudetenland, and that's it. And you leave Czechoslovakia alone. If you're Hitler, what do? You take the deal. And then what do you do after that? You go ahead and invade later. Because Britain and France basically played their cards at the Munich conference of, we're not going to stop you. They had an opportunity here and decided it just wasn't worth their time. They didn't necessarily see Hitler as being that dangerous and sort of thought, hey, if we give it to him, he'll back off. Well, he didn't. So Czechoslovakia was informed that they had to defend the Sudetenland themselves. Basically, France, Britain, and the Soviet Union are like, hey, this deal was made. We're going to allow the Sudetenland to be taken by Hitler. He says that he's not going to invade the rest of Czechoslovakia, but the Sudetenland, you're going to lose it. On October 1st of 1938, Germany is going to send in troops through the Sudetenland, and then months later, because Hitler is Hitler, he's going to go ahead and invade the rest of Czechoslovakia, and Britain and France do absolutely nothing. The Munich conference is key. If a deal had been made here, or if something had been done to try and stop Hitler here, I don't know if it would have stopped World War II from happening, but it probably would have delayed the start of it, because basically a year later, World War II is officially going to begin in Europe. But the Munich conference, it really just allowed Hitler the opportunity to get away with whatever it is that he wanted to get away with. And it also kind of told Hitler of, these European nations probably aren't going to do anything to stop you. So it's like kind of like taking candy from a baby. If you want land in Europe, go get it, because nobody's going to do anything. Hitler was also very smart. We talk about how evil he was, and there's no question that he was, but he was also very smart. And he, looked at the mistakes that Germany had made in World War I, and he realized that, the death to Germany in World War I was the fact that they had a two-front war in which they were fighting both Russia and the rest of Europe on two different fronts. So Hitler's like, we need to avoid this two-front war altogether. So a couple of foreign ministers, one from the Soviet Union and one from Germany, Molotov and Ribbentrop. Again, I'm probably butchering their names. I know I definitely am. They're going to be the ministers that represent both Germany and the Soviet Union in this deal. And they're going to make a deal between these two nations that they would not go to war with one another. And this was signed in August of 1939, about a month before World War II officially begins. And the reason that Hitler is going to sign this pact is because, again, he learned the mistakes that Germany made in World War I. He's like, and the biggest mistake that they made was the fact that there was a two-front war. So if we avoided two-front war altogether, guess what? I can kind of focus on Western Europe and not have to worry about what the Soviet Union is going to do. So by signing this pact, they avoided two-front war. Even though like Hitler and Stalin didn't necessarily like one another or trust one another, they definitely are going to go ahead and sign this pact. Again, it's to avoid that two-front war, and it's really going to be beneficial, especially for Germany. The secret part of the treaty is that they would divide Poland as well as other countries, and when World War II officially kicks off, it's going to be when Germany invades Poland in September of 1939.